And we are recording. Welcome all. Welcome, Dan. Let's dive into the devil.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me. This is our second time with Urban Mystics, and it's always great to be a part of this, be a part of the group. I know I've been sharing some things in there, so people may already have encountered the interesting devilish artwork, as well as the live stream where I talked a little bit about my story, which we might get into tonight. But thanks for having me.
Yes, and I think this topic is so important and so relevant in many different ways, as I know many international urban mystics come from a variety of backgrounds, but the devil is such a charged archetypal character, which I'm really excited that you're going to go into tonight, and kind of the origin story of the devil, the history of the devil, and then also how my view of the devil too are inner demons, and
Yes.
how they can keep us cut off from things, kind of the old cartoon of the angel and the devil on the shoulder.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
kind of exploring some of those archetypes together tonight. So would love to hear the history of the devil and of that pre-Christian identity that's been there even before what we know the devil to be today is.
Yeah, and it's important, the things that you mentioned about the way we've kind of internalized the devil or pictured the devil classically, or have engaged with the devil through pop culture and cultural media. All of that is really the culmination of thousands of years of religious interaction and the kind of cooking down and distilling of what this archetypal figure is. As you said, the best place to start really is in the kind of pre-Christian discussion of the devil figure and the history of the devil. We believe the devil today to be something that we probably were informed about more about through cartoons, as you were saying, like the devil on the shoulder, than even in church. If there are people here who have attended, especially an American like nominal Christian group, we let pop culture really inform our perspective on the devil. And yet the devil as a figure has existed far before Christianity. The pre-Mesopotamian figure of the devil is really rooted in a sense of duality, a sense of chaos, but certainly that dualness, that dual nature is important to hone in on. You mentioned the angel and the devil on the shoulder kind of arguing. It's a perfect example because it's one of those things that's existed for thousands of years, despite not being part of an official church canon or being part of the way we might, the historical nature of the devil outside of that element of chaos, those early, I would say, very pantheist oriented views of what was happening in the cosmos. So when we look towards like a pre-Mesopotamian figure of the devil, we're seeing really people discussing there's a God which protects me and my tribe and my city, and my tribe and my city and my safety represent security. And then there's something else. There's a God that exists out there, outside of my city, in the desert, in the wilderness, in the deep, dark woods. And I don't know what that God is really all about, but he's certainly not about my internal safety or the way I'm building this society or the way my group is working together to further our own cause. And really, the devil begins to be formed out of this sense of otherness. The devil becomes not just the other that's lurking through the dark woods or existing in the windswept dunes of the desert, that weird wind energy just blowing across and constantly shifting the landscape, but also then that strange God from that other tribe. I don't know anything about their beliefs, but that's not my belief. And so that must be that other, that mystical kind of chaotic figure as well. One of the key and interesting things, though, is that this original like pre-Mesopotamian version of the devil, this chaotic figure, is best represented by this deity, which almost every, especially like Northern African representation of the devil that shows us had some kind of horn depiction. The element of the horns was important. And it's something that travels through even today. We see the devil, of course, with those devilish horns. Just like that nature of the duality, it's this deeply baked in archetype. And it seems to, we could discuss this idea of our God looking a lot like us, but whatever is out there in the chaos is a mixture of the natural and the unnatural. There's something we know of natural creatures with horns, but humans don't have horns. So there's that weird blending of what should be and what shouldn't be. That kind of moving through, it's not purely this horned, unrecognizable creature. It looks a little bit like me, but also it is very different nonetheless. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, as you're mentioning, this otherness is just so relevant to even today, of the fear of the unknown, the wild forest, and how these archetypes of unknown territory are still so prevalent today, and how predecessors and our ancestors, looking back, were just saying, oh, well, that is completely other. That is, we may not have had the word the devil yet, but this is the beginnings of the devil.
For sure. These concepts we have about the devil, we tend to think, and I think we believe this about ourselves in many areas in our life, that we are currently at the most advanced peak of human civilization. And so every thought we're having is a new thought. And yet that's not quite true, because the ways in which we today look at this archetypal figure of the devil, and the fear and the chaos and the unnaturalness of it, is something that our ancestors were working with, integrating directly into their belief systems. Once we move out of this like pre-Mesopotamic era where the devil is simply this characterized other, this is where we begin to look into more like unified and codified systems of religion. So one of the earlier texts, and I'm going to use specifically here, I should mention, while we will talk briefly about the Greek pantheon, some of the Roman ideas which informed this view of the devil, it is really important here to mention that a lot of what I'm going to be discussing is going to come through or be informed at the very least by a at least nominally Christian view of what the devil is. As we get further, that'll be elaborated on, but it's important to note because it wasn't until far later that the church kind of really begins to build out a whole eschatology around the devil and really define this character. We see those archetypal pieces, though, quite early. One of the earliest texts that was nearly included in the standard Bible, but eventually was not, was the book of Enoch. It probably predates the book of Genesis, probably written shortly around or after the book of Job, which would be the oldest of the Hebrew texts that are currently canonized in the popular culture or the popular consciousness when we look at the Bible. Here, we're beginning to see people struggle with their idea of the God of the tribe versus whatever's out there, and begin to build something out of that, move the pieces around the board, really come up with something that feels more unified. So in the book of Job, we have this individual who comes to before God and acts like a liaison between God and the titular character Job. This liaison is never referred to as the devil. He's referred to as the adversary or the inquisitor, and he's simply there to say, hey, God, this person, I don't think they like you as much as you think they like you, and to kind of tweak and twist things, to kind of provide some pushback. This is a questioning figure that, again, is not only introducing chaos into the life of Job, but is introducing chaos into the depicted God's relationship with this being, this mortal being that was created for the express purpose of being in communion with this immortal being. So, and this is important to note, it comes before Genesis. So we're really beginning to see this outside figure who's somehow connected to the divine, somehow can travel between the two realms, but is very much responsible for interjecting friction, for pushing back a little bit on boundaries, and for testing the waters. In the book of Enoch, we see something referred to as the Watchers, which are this kind of idea of these angelic beings, or these, again, uh, partial deities or deific beings who are interacting with the mortal plane. One of these beings is identified to one degree or another as the devil, what we would classically consider to be the devil. And these are beings which have decided to act in some form of rebellion against that larger structure of what God and religion might be, and do their own thing. Again, they're not creating their own space, but they're interacting and providing friction and tension. Specifically in the book of Enoch, the Watchers are responsible for interacting with women. They come into women's lives within the closed group, and they provide them with an element of power that they would probably not have experienced at that time. In this case, because it's a very old text, it's power through childbirth. Their children are giants. Their children are endued with kind of almost demigod kind of status. Here's a great example to tie to another culture, thinking about, like, say, Hercules, or these kinds of demigods. The Watchers really are this kind of, they are the prototype for the fallen angel, the idea of gods, demons, devils kind of structure. So we really begin to see people kind of mush around with that element of chaos, and then see, how does the chaos interact not only with me, if I can't keep it outside, but how does the chaos interact directly with a divine realm, the pantheon of gods? Once we separate ourselves from that early Hebrew Babylonian text, we're seeing a similar thought process occur with antiquity. We're seeing the Greeks come to their own kind of conclusions about what this pantheon is versus what this devilish figure might be. And for the Greek pantheon in antiquity, we're talking about specifically Hecate. She is a goddess of the crossroads. She predates the rest of the Greek pantheon, and she is not subdued according to the original texts, as best we can tell. She's not bound by any dictates that Zeus would have offered. So Zeus here, of course, acting in that very head of the kingdom of heaven, the kind of head of God state. She predates that and isn't even bound by it. And she works in a similar way, where she kind of runs interference between the mortals and the realm of the gods. So we can kind of see these things developing. I wouldn't say they're being, in a way, almost co-created. They're pulling from that kind of same rationale of how do we integrate chaos? How do we integrate this idea of something else, but also create a world where our tribe and our God and our city is protected by the things we believe. These things just kind of begin to layer and layer and layer. By the time we hit early Judaism, we're talking about the ideas such as the things shown in Genesis, the Genesis myth, where this adversary figure embodied by the serpent, here is still not referred to as the devil. And important to note, not really considered to be the devil in the way we think about the devil today. In its original context, we're still looking at this as this element of the other, that may be multiple entities, may be one entity that God has kind of sanctioned. But we see this story of this serpent beginning to endue humanity, not just to run interference and to say, are these people as loyal to you, God, as you think? But now this entity has decided to start giving humanity things. Here we see, of course, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The serpent figure is giving Eve knowledge in the story, again, dealing directly with women, but giving her knowledge. And at the same time, we're seeing myths which are building up around the concept of Pythagoras, my goodness.
We're mixing sacred geometry.
Yeah, no, goodness, my mind is totally blanking. We're seeing in the north, in like Germanic folklore, we're seeing the myth of like Loki. He's doing something very similar. He's giving information to people. Yeah. And then we're also seeing Prometheus stealing fire from God and giving technology to humans. So there's this concept now of the devil has his own agency and his own plans, this figure that runs independent, seems to maybe have its own agenda.
Yeah. Trickery and some seems more helpful than harmful.
Yeah, and this is something that I think we haven't played with, and one of the concepts that really attracts me to the devil is we haven't played with this concept as well as we should have in the popular consciousness, because for so many years the devil has been weaponized as a tool, a propagandic tool, a cautionary tale, that in the earliest structure, in the earliest myths, the devil is, or the prototypes of the devil, are giving humans what they need to be self-sufficient. And this is a theme which will undergird the rest of our talk tonight. But the devil, whether you're talking about the serpent giving Eve the knowledge of good and evil, or you're talking about Prometheus giving humanity fire, or Loki giving us technology, humanity wouldn't probably be able to continue without any of those things. In the Genesis myth, and Mitch Horowitz, a wonderful writer, Cult America is one of his books, as well as a collection of essays on Satan. I highly recommend his work. Makes the point that if Adam and Eve in this mythic garden were to continue just living in their sense of order, there would never be any of us, according to that mythic story. There would simply be perfect order and harmony for eternity, which may sound very nice for Adam and Eve, but certainly not for me, because I wouldn't be here. Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies.
No worries. Yeah, and it is something of this, the ideals and utopia and what could have been, but this trickster, this informer, this kind of divine little wisdom stealer coming back and giving it to, interestingly, the women, which that has so many, going back to some universal concepts of, oh, the unknown forest, the darkness, unknown territory, to also women and having knowledge, which is really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really not until we begin to move into this kind of Christianized version of the devil that people begin to try and reckon with that. Because up until this kind of 300s Common Era Christianity as the Roman state religion, there is a real sense of Gnosticism around not just Christianity or Judaism or these Greek or Hellenic ideas, but also around the way in which these deities relate to women and relate to others. We're talking specifically here, the Christian church and the early Christian church begins a real campaign to try and understand how they can defeat Gnosticism in the public consciousness. The Gnostic viewpoint of the devil is simply this one of duality, one which was very popular, especially in Christian Rome, because the Roman soldiers and the Roman middle class, which was essentially built entirely out of military and military associated families, really loved the idea of a good god and a bad god, and they are locked in mortal combat.
Yep.
And it really helps it's a really helpful way of viewing the world, because when bad things happen, we can say, well, the bad god just won out against the good god today. Yep. So the early Christian church really begins to try and decide, how can we continue to perpetuate this monotheism, and still allow for the very useful mechanization of the devil. The devil here can explain away and be a useful tool for explaining away a lot of things which we don't want to directly deal with. One of those things being specifically the role of women and women in power. When we see a lot of the gods and goddesses of rivaling religions around 300 CE and onward, as the Holy Roman Empire kind of expands, it becomes very easy to say the Oracle of Delphi, Hecate, these goddesses which mean something to you in your practical worship, Hermes, they aren't important. They're actually the devil trying to deceive you, and so you need to cast them out. The gods which were easier to forget, that didn't have as much cultural cachet, they simply kind of evaporated from consciousness. People just kind of began to abandon them as time and history went on. And some of those things were the results of very violent wars and interactions, but others were those gods simply began to lose staying power over time. The ones which just were consistently thorny and couldn't be dismissed through sainthood or couldn't be dismissed through warfare were really internalized into this idea of the devil. And the devil becomes a collection of ideas more than a singular idea.
Mm. Yeah. How we co-create things. We're so creative.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And what's interesting is, well, the ideas behind trying to get rid of a figure by simply making it the bad guy, what actually happened, a byproduct here, is the devil becomes a figure with a lot of staying power because it has a lot of different facets. The devil doesn't have to be one thing to each person. It can be an expression of many different things. This kind of leveraging of state propaganda and like church belief as well really begins to work against the church proper. By the time we reach the Protestant Reformation, some of the art I shared in the urban mystics community showed Martin Luther's head being played like bagpipes by the devil, which is one of my favorites. Because it was a way in which through this art and cultural force, the devil could be identified as the mouthpiece for state's enemies. And unfortunately, state's enemies are often a minority of people who are oppressed by that same state. So the devil, while it might have been attractive to, say, individuals living in Italy circa the 1500s or 1700s, enjoying the fruits of the Holy Roman Empire and the fruits of Charlemagne's conquest, that idea of the devil playing Martin Luther's head is far more appealing to some of the more Germanic tribes, northern, who associate themselves with Luther and associate themselves with the cause that this person was espousing. And so if the devil's behind it, well, maybe the devil's on my side too. We begin to see those ideas kind of shore up and firm up what the devil actually is. For me, as an American and someone who's explicitly emerged from the evangelical tradition, I find it fascinating that we don't reach a fully coherent picture of the devil until we begin to move into the Protestant, the American Protestant revitalization. Once the American evangelical movement kicks off in full swing, we really begin to see this kind of real solidification of the devil, not just as a collection of all of our enemies, although that's certainly something which the devil will remain, but also as a figure of distinct power, and specifically a power that has evil mechanizations behind it. It is important to note historically, the devil was not always represented as an evil figure. The evilness was more accurately shown to be like chaos and an adversary against the order of whatever the dominant order was. Mm-hmm. The devil also historically is somewhat more of a minor figure. We have Hermes and we have Hecate and we have Loki, and they are important and they serve a function within their religion, certainly. But they themselves are available for us to traffic with, and they require some degree of, they seem to have their own, they have their own identity, but their own anonymity as well. They can function in a myriad of different ways, which speaks to that chaos. They truly are gods of the crossroads. Mm. That kind of begins to disappear as we talk through, of course, the evangelical Protestant awakening in America, where this is codified into almost a supervillain as opposed to an archetypal force. The devil moves from being the some spirits which may be helpful, or the wind in the trees, or the unfortunate hurricane, to full on, the devil is now Thanos and is the villain for all times.
Yes.
So that's really where we get a lot of our popular consciousness around the devil today. And it, of course, informs movements that have now associated and appropriated the form or the idea of the devil.
Yeah. I'm reminded too of I have a couple folks that may be joining us tonight that were in my witch history portion of my baby witch class, where we were speaking of the Malleus Maleficarum, and the picture of the devil starts to form into this distinct figure that women definitely have a relationship with.
Yes, yes. And that we can track all the way back to that early text, the Book of Enoch, with the Watchers. The Watchers are dealing specifically with women, and importantly, the church identifies that as we're kind of defining what the devil is in that Roman Christian state. They identify that relationship, and they specifically do not want to exculpate the women from that interaction. They don't want to view this as the women were merely unfortunate victims of these devilish figures. Instead, they actually use a word that I find very interesting. They specifically point to forming a pact with these individuals.
Yes.
And so there's really a sense of a kind of co-interaction here, something that both parties have agreed to, which is why they're both bad and we should not listen to anything they have to say. But that's an element which really emerges as far back as those pre-Mesopotamian texts and has stuck with us to this period. I know a lot of people have fears around the devil or concepts around the devil that if they allow the devil in some way, they will become entwined in his supervillain plans.
Yes.
This is as recent as The Haunting of Bly Manor. One of the main protagonists in that Netflix show asks the priestly figure, how does possession occur? And the priest responds, well, you have to consent to being possessed. And so it's this idea of the pact forming, the agreement.
Which I think is really interesting as we go into the devil as archetype, and Lucifer, the name being of light, and the themes that we start seeing evolving, as you're saying, into these shifts in evangelical America and how America is kind of shifting and solidifying the devil as well.
Yes, yes. And it's important here to make a distinction as well. When we talk about the devil is a useful archetypal tool, but I like to view the devil as an umbrella, where the term devil really encapsulates a lot of different devils. And you can apply demonology to this if you want to, or you can apply just the idea that, like I said earlier, Hermes or Loki or Hecate all focus and exist within this same realm. When we use the term Lucifer, Lucifer predates a lot of the early Christian iconography around the devil. We get the term Lucifer, morning or evening star, probably from the same cult which worships and forms around Venus. It's also specifically a name which was associated with Christ by the Gnostics. And there are some scriptural references here where the Bible will refer to Christ as the morning star in Isaiah, this idea of the light bringer, the redemption figure. And some early Gnostics were quick to point out that Lucifer and Christ were the same person, which you can imagine did not go over very well.
Oh, imagine being a fly on those meetings.
Exactly. So we do see Lucifer as the light bringer, and again, focusing in again on that idea of Prometheus bringing fire, or Lucifer bringing knowledge, or Loki bringing technology. These are all this concept of humanity kind of needs that intercession between, or that interference, I should say, between this realm of the divine and the realm of ourselves. which I think speaks greatly to this concept in America of like the radical like self-transformation and self-ownership and like new thought. These concepts around building oneself, self-development, are very, in a way, Luciferian. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's very exciting.
I know, just thinking my old Pentecostal Christian roots in my belly are shivering
I know.
saying that this is Luciferian, which is so funny because intellectually we know, right? And it's
Mhm.
just so ingrained in the culture.
Yeah, exactly. It really is. One of the things, when I was back in my undergrad days, I did a lot of work studying around biblical scholarship. And so again, it's a lens by which I view the world. Uh, I was always amazed. The college I went to was well known for its biblical and religious studies department, but I was always amazed at how little these departments invested time into discussing American traditions like New Thought specifically, because it really does inform this country. If you were to look back 200, 300 years ago and tell someone that everything is fine, you just need a positive mental attitude, they would look at you like you were mad. But today, we've internalized that. That's not uncommon to think, well, everything happens for a reason, or I just need to stay positive about this situation. It will all work out. Those are like ways in which New Thought have informed our culture, but also have informed Christianity, and by extension have informed the devil. When we look towards the 60s and that like cultural revolution that occurs, one of the things to spill out of that cultural revolution is Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan, appearing in San Francisco. And beyond just the elements of the sexual revolution, which of course corresponds directly again to Satan and women, is also this idea of the devil as an agent for radical self-transformation. LaVey was very much motivated by New Thought thinkers and very much motivated by objectivists. So the writings of Ayn Rand influenced him greatly. Despite later having a break with that philosophy, he originally, when writing the Satanic Bible, was very much invested in those ideas of we have it within us to make the transformations we need to make. We decide our own future. Similarly, he's inspired by the works of Milton, which we'll get to when we discuss more probing questions. But we begin to look at the devil with a kind of softness around the 60s, and some of the earlier texts like Milton. Tolkien also does a good job of looking at and imbuing the devil with maybe a more sympathetic coat of paint.
Yes.
But really looking and saying this individual is not all bad. In a lot of ways, we occupy the same space as the devil. In a lot of ways, we are all a little devilish. We have these aspirations for greatness, where we're told that Lucifer is struck out of heaven because he wants to be like God. We have those aspirations. We want to make more money. We want to live in a better world. We want to, have the house that's as nice as my neighbor's house, or most importantly, have freedom. We want to be able to decide what we want to do and when we want to do it. And these are all concepts which loop back to Lucifer, to this concept of it's better for me to be able to make my own choices and own chaos than it is for me to live my life as simply what I'm supposed to do. We see this in messaging around being a corporate drone versus being an entrepreneur. What's more entrepreneurial than Lucifer?
We'll make that a statement. Post
Yes.
sure.
This is the t-shirt.
Be like, you're an entrepreneur, you are of the devil.
Exactly. So with that, though, comes radical self-ownership. And this is an important part of, I think, the devilish archetype. We have this encounter with this trickster spirit. And by trickster, I mean, of course, not someone like out and out trying to trick you or get one over on you, but certainly more like a kind of Bugs Bunny character, where it has its own intentions as well. And you kind of meet somewhere in the middle. But with that, when you allow chaos to approach, then there's this element of you own what comes out of it. You can, for example, historically, if people were curious or concerned about leaving the safety of their town and going into the woods, there's a great bounty of things in the woods. There's so many natural resources, which would have been important to industrializing in the time period where people would have been exploring the vast untapped wilderness. But there's also a lot of danger. You are staking a claim on, I am abandoning my life here on the mills as a serf, and I am going into the wilderness to build my own home or start a logging industry or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that comes with that. And I think we can internalize that today, that once we begin living life in the way in which we want to live it, this radical self, this authenticity, we have to own what comes with that. For example, I, growing up in an evangelical tradition with a very evangelical family, for me, my best and most radical, authentic self is being a seance host, a psychic, talking about the devil. And it is great. I wouldn't change it for the world. But I also have to own the fact that it's caused divisions within my family where people are not comfortable with this, where they certainly are concerned that I'm going to go to hell, and uncomfortable conversations that arise out of that about the choices I make. That's all part of it. The devil is certainly not able to give you any sway. It is, you take it all or you take none of it. You have to run with what you get, which again is baked into that kind of American consciousness, for good or ill. We all kind of believe that.
Absolutely. Again, that co-creation, but also acknowledging how there was that leap from this is the chaos and I will not even touch it to, wait, maybe if I do explore this chaos or this unknown territory, I can come away with some kind of gold, some kind of wisdom.
Exactly. Yeah. I like to think about it a lot when I use, when I'm doing tarot readings, because a popular, and I mean, Isabel, you know this because you read tarot, but like a popular reading of a devil tarot card is, you're bound by your desires, or there's something subjugating you. And it often has to deal with like lack of self-control or those types of topics. But I had a tarot instructor who said the devil can also be read as an admonishment and a reminder to indulge a little bit. Maybe you're being a little too uptight and you need to let loose. You can go to a party. You can accept those invitations. You can't, maybe you won't find a romantic partner unless you go out on a date. Those kinds of things. The devil can be a story about that as well. And we do see that I like to think of a small pamphlet I once read called Armchair Demonology from a wonderful zine, Peculiar Parish. I highly recommend their work. But they have a wonderful little pamphlet called Armchair Demonology about the importance for the human, for the lived experience to occasionally indulge, and not just indulge, but maybe cultivate a vice, to maybe find some time to smoke that pipe, or to drink a little too much alcohol, because within that occasionally comes really great ideas or inspiration, a freeness from the routine. Mm-hmm. We can sometimes cultivate these bad habits, or what's referred to as a bad habit, with the object of achieving something out of that state of chaos or state of disarray. And I think that's a very poignant message in America, where we're told to go, 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 go. You can't take time to rest. If you rest, then you're not being busy, and it's important to be busy. And the devil can be a reminder to say, wait a second, we can sit here and do something that's not productive, that doesn't contribute to the order, because maybe out of that, something will contribute to the self.
Mm-hmm. And I love that your instructor for tarot said that, because I also teach it the same way. There are the chains that are around the neck in the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith deck, but they're also, if you see, not completely clasped. There is an awareness or a choice there, and the devil giving that awareness of that choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure, for certain. I think we see that too as this archetypal force, and we're talking a lot about chaos. So I think it's important to also address a sense of anarchism, a personal anarchism, if you will. The devil has been, of course, appropriated by a lot of not just politically anarchistic movements, but also like I will say culturally anarchistic movements. I know Ursula K. Le Guin, an amazing science fiction author, just a fantastic writer, has a lot of work which parallels very well with this concept of engaging with the chaos, because the chaos, the untapped, the avoidance of order is in its own way an opportunity maker. It's a place where we can go to find opportunity. What that opportunity is up to you and what you make of it, but certainly you won't find that opportunity in the everyday, the standard kind of progression. The Diablicon, which was written as a later addition to Anton LaVey's Church of Satan. Later, there was a distinct division there with the Church of Satan becoming the Temple of Set. The head of the Temple of Set wrote a book called the Diablicon, very well worth anyone's time. And it is a story, a fictionalized or a channeled account of that rebellion discussed in the Book of Enoch with the Watchers, and that Milton kind of develops a little bit in Paradise Lost, but certainly delves more deeply into a firsthand account from the devil's perspective of that rebellion against the kingdom of heaven and what that meant. This is where we find that one of a reiteration of the immortal line, it's better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. The concept being here that the devil and his legion say, the order which is represented here, this cosmic order, is all well and good, but it's stifling. It ultimately becomes impossible to create because we're stuck within this realm of order. And the Diablicon has this wonderful artistic, something I've never seen really anywhere else, this version that's offered of hell, not as being a place of a burning and gnashing of teeth, or as a place of like Dante's Inferno being this icy chamber. Instead, hell is just pure chaos. Everyone experiences it differently who enters this realm. And it's almost untenable to be there unless one knows oneself and can construct one's reality. And it's a very interesting concept, which is kind of built out of this worldview of, again, a radical self-ownership, as well as a kind of anarchism in the face of oppression.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. The concept is really good, and that is
Yes.
right, self-mastery in this lifetime, but then self-mastery in the next, to then
Mm-hmm.
create your own, in a way, hell. But it sounds
Yes.
like the most, I can imagine some artists having their way with
Oh,
imaginary
yes.
uses of chaos.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Which is, I guess, here we are at 7:45. So this would be a great place, I wonder, to kind of build into some of the questions that I've come from with dealing with this concept of the devil before we get into praxis. And I think anyone who encounters the devil, whether as an entity in which they work with in a magical tradition, which I've certainly done, or as a kind of archetypal force that one uses for their own self-betterment or in a kind of Jungian language, there were some questions that I felt really stuck with me and that I'd like to pose to anyone who watches this, which is the first thing we have to make, I think, our peace with is it better then to reign in hell than to serve in heaven? This is a poignant line from Milton, and it's one which I think has informed every iteration of the devil since we've seen it. Whether you're watching popular culture like films like The Witch, or films like the doesn't matter, but it stars Keanu Reeves and the devil's a lawyer. these these films where we look at the devil somewhat sympathetically and to wonder in our own lives, is it better to do that? I think for the vast amount of Americans, certainly, the answer might be yes. If we can't feel that earthly sense of I am living life on my terms and the way I want to live it for whatever reason, by following the way that society has laid out rules for us, then maybe it is better to reign in that chaos and to live that chaotic life. I think of you, Isabel, specifically because you spent a vast period of your life doing that digital nomad kind of artistic work, and for you, that's something which a lot of people would say is chaotic. It's an element of chaos they couldn't stand, they wouldn't want. But for you, it was better to experience those nomadic life on that kind of a nomadic terms of engagement than maybe it was to sit in a really boring temp job every day. I don't know, I might be speaking too much on your behalf.
No. And I think you named it there of thinking back to order and chaos as these themes, right? And I think coming from my background of coming from chaos, from where I was born and political refugee and asylum, to then very strict order of a Pentecostal Christian church where Pokemon was of the devil. I did not throw away my Pikachu.
It's too cute.
It was too cute. I was like, how? No, stop it. To then really challenging these things, and then, like you say, embracing that chaos and saying, well, all of these types of jobs and order of how things should be, I'm not really feeling it. And I could say, in a way, there was a maybe a Thor moment of lightning bolts technology coming in and saying, wait a second, they're seeing the trends of how things were going and seeing the possibilities of online things like now, where Zoom has become normalized, unfortunately, due to crisis.
Yeah.
Where that was my normal order for all time. And then coming back to appreciating order. So I see these, the good and the bad.
Yeah, for sure.
Of those cycles.
And they can't really be separated. That's something
Yeah.
which I think is very important. We can't pretend that pure chaos is always good and wonderful. There is an element of a kind of downside that comes with this. Yet it is about, in the end, the individual. So one of the other questions that sticks with me constantly is, who decides my world? If we look to this kind of pantheon of Lucifer, Lucifer decides his own world. He has rejected this concept of working within the larger structure that was ordained for him. However, out of that comes an alienation from that structure that was ordained for him. So this is a concept which I think we can all work with, which is, who decides my life? Am I comfortable ceding my life to someone else? And some people certainly are, and that's fine. If that's what gives them comfort and makes them comfortable, then by all means. But it is a question which comes to the mind often when discussing Lucifer, is who is deciding my world and calling the shots for me? I think specifically here about women's relationship historically with the devil and the concept of witchcraft and witches. These are, in many cases, either mythically or factually, individuals who are living within a society that actively oppressed them and said, no, I decide something different for me. I'm deciding my world. And as such, made a pact or a deal with forces that were outside of the control of that structure of society. There's an element of initiative there.
Absolutely. And I love in my class, going through the list of what could have been a sign that you may have made this pact, was being just a bit too smart in the town that you were in the village, to asking too many questions, to knowing herbal wisdom from who knows where, maybe going into that unknown forest.
Oh, for sure. And this is, again, I love, one of my favorite movies when it comes to, because I like to think about pop culture a lot. As much as I love the occult and like dusty books, I also really love to see what people are saying about the devil right now. And one of my favorite iterations of this kind of tension between the devil and women and uh, American Christianity is, of course, the film The Witch.
Mm.
Uh, just an excellent example of, again, that wilderness, that chaos, but then also an evolution of our thought regarding Lucifer and women specifically, where before we're looking at Lucifer, women, the devil, as something to be feared and that nothing good can come from, to today in this moment in culture and time, looking at this and saying, well, at the end of The Witch, the only person who survives, and then also the hero, is the young woman who makes the deal to live wildly, to live deliciously in the woods with
Yeah.
all her coven members and this force that she's made an active pact with. And unlike in the 60s, a reactionary film like Rosemary's Baby, where poor Rosemary is just thrown from situation to situation and her life is a horror story as these satanic forces take it over.
Mm.
The Witch is a tale where this individual chooses this option and is materially better for it in the end.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sure. So one of the other things which I think is important is not simply just the discussion of women around Lucifer, but also the way in which people have interacted with Lucifer when we're talking about liberation movements. One of the most current and topical moments could, of course, be the Satanic Temple, which has no relation to the Church of Satan or the Temple of Set, but simply embodies that kind of satanic movement for people who feel oppressed by state or feel oppressed by the structures of society currently. Lucifer has kind of become a rallying cry for individuals in that position. I think sometimes it's been classified, talking about Lucifer or dealing with the devil, as a last resort. This
Uh-huh.
concept comes from the idea of making a deal with the devil as if there's some kind of catch-22 here, or you're giving your soul in exchange for something else. Um, Instead, I think it's important to note that a lot of times the dominant culture has kind of expressed that as a way of alienating or dismissing uh, oppressed oppressed peoples within society. I think specifically here to the idea of liberation theology within the Christian church. Liberation theology was extremely popular during the Southern Reconstruction after after the Emancipation Proclamation. A lot of Southern ministers and African American churches were very much identifying this idea of Jesus as a liberating figure who cared for oppressed peoples and came to liberate them from their chains, and cast their experience, this lived experience with slavery, and this coming of a messianic figure.
Mm.
And a lot of anti well, a lot of segregationist churches or anti-abolitionist movements specifically called liberation theology a heresy from the devil. And again, you see this idea of the weaponization of the devil. But rather than Martin Luther's head being played by a trombone, it was Abraham Lincoln's head being played as a bagpipe. This is the kind of idea where we see that weaponization again. I love that example specifically because, again, it calls into kind of almost relief the idea of the Jesus and Lucifer sharing that same kind of space as the morning star or the liberator from oppression, without those individuals having any concept or knowledge of early Gnostics' belief regarding Jesus as the morning star or Lucifer as the morning star. So again, you see this weird archetypal cosmic overlap that again ties this figure directly into movements associated with oppression.
Absolutely, in that way. And I could see how it still is, to this day, America divided, and that the devil can still be used as a propagandic weapon.
Mm-hmm. For
um,
sure.
for different ideologies, political, religious, or otherwise. Um, but I hope that what was shared tonight gives more light.
Yes. Yes.
on
Um,
the multiplicities that the devil is.
mhm, definitely. I would love to, and I know we are running short on time.
We're good.
Um, I don't know how much longer you have here. I would love to drop some praxis as well
Yes,
as
please.
traditional, but I know we also may have questions, so I will leave that to you.
I think let's go in with the praxis. And of course, the chat is open. And I do have some from the Urban Mystics Facebook group. I have 2 questions
Awesome.
I think we can get to after praxis.
Okay, great. So I will start with praxis kind of here as baby steps. I would assume if someone is interested in working with the archetype of the devil or an entity like that, if they are magically operant, they're here because they're interested in that. Uh, I've kind of approached this in 2 ways, the 2 ways which were most common to me. Sometimes people are very concerned about the idea of working with the devil, large capital D, because of this concept of, oh no, will I be damned? Will I lose my eternal soul? Um,
Yes.
so the way I eased myself into this, as far as praxis was concerned, was working with an entity or a deity that lived under the umbrella of the devil. So Hermes for me, was an obvious choice. Hermes is traditionally considered to be one of the Greek pantheon gods associated with commerce, with again, tricks, like that trickster element, so specifically speech, but also interestingly deceit and lying. Also a god of the crossroads. So a simple practice for me when working with Hermes was simply to go, I found myself a crossroads that I thought Hermes might like, and this was just based off of intuition. And every day as I would walk down the path that was near my old apartment, I would take a little stone and I would build a herm on the side of the crossroads there. The herm actually derives from Hermes, and herms were large markers on the states of crossroads that denoted intersection and ways to different cities. As you can imagine, commerce would flow along those roads. So it wasn't uncommon for merchants or for travelers to leave offerings at the herm for protection, but also for the concept of the deal that they were trying to make, that it would go through well. You can imagine moving, if you would, from Rome to Greece with a large supply of whatever you're trying to sell. You have no real guarantee that when you get to Greece, the person who is going to buy from you is still there, or that they're not just going to say, well, I said it would be X, but now how about a third of that? So Hermes was always invoked, or was often invoked, to secure that transaction and to keep things moving freely. When I would leave a small rock at the herm, my concept was always about what things could I be doing internally or even externally, but what things could I be doing to achieve my goals and see their completion. So perhaps it would be if I had if I was working with a client and trying to secure an upcoming event, uh, we would know through email that both myself and the client were interested, but that moment at the herm would provide me with some introspection to say, well, okay, Hermes, what else can I be doing to ensure this deal goes through? What other things can I be adding to this stew? Should I send another email? Should I maybe send a package that explains who I am, or a gift of some kind? Or is there a better way I can be dealing with this person? And those are purely like very easy to integrate, almost mindfulness techniques, something that's very secularized and can feel very distinct from working with some kind of God form. Um, you can use any of these entities there. Any god of a crossroads would probably be appreciated. So if it were Hermes or Prometheus or Hecate or Loki, all of them have crossroads origins, and all of them appreciate not just the building of structures, but also sometimes small gifts or offerings. Curiously, all of them really appreciate tobacco, probably because tobacco has such a highly charged commerce identity to it at the time it was one of the first organic compounds which was traded freely and was involved in both like personal relaxation but also religious ceremony. So there are these things we can kind of pull on those cosmic threads.
Yes.
If you want to go a little bit further and work directly with Lucifer, I do like to draw this distinction. And this is one Gordon White draws as well. Full disclosure, I am very much a chaos magician, so I love pulling from disparate traditions and cultures as long as I feel that I'm being respectful and that the entities on the other end of the line are comfortable working with me. I'm comfortable with that as well. It's important to draw the distinction between devil and Lucifer here, because Lucifer kind of predates this bigger idea of the devil. As I said earlier, the devil is just like the umbrella term for all of these trickster entities, spirits, etc. Lucifer has that very much internal light-bringing morning star, evening star kind of personality. So within that, I see a lot of overlap for personal development, and that can be physical or that can be like emotional, spiritual development as well. Lucifer also has some of the best and most well-recorded versions of crossroads work. One of the most common stories we hear is, of course, the famous blues guitarist who went and sold his soul at the crossroads to learn to play guitar. An interesting story, and certainly one which is kind of stuck with consciousness and has been adopted. But what we find when we look towards some of the older writings around Lucifer and what these entities want at a crossroads, it's very often the devil does not want your soul. As a practicing chaos magician, to borrow a line from Gordon White, my soul is worth a lot less than I think. So, but for others, the soul is an intangible thing, which you can kind of create your own working idea around. You have your own beliefs about what your soul is, whether that's a metaphysical thing or your essence of being. And as you can imagine, that might not be super useful to an entity. So often what's recommended is, when we engage with these figures in a magical sense, is what they really want is recognition. Often, especially the devil, wants people to tell other people about Lucifer. Often we see trickster entities, Hermes, Loki, Hecate, saying, what I'd really like is for you to go out and tell other people that I did this thing that worked for you.
What a sneaky marketer the devil is.
Oh, for sure. So this brings me to the story that I think is most my most real kind of experience with this entity is I was going through the pandemic, of course, experiencing the slowdown in my general work that we all probably experience to one degree or another, as well as the mental health things that go along with that. And I decided I would undertake an operation to work with the devil. So I found, well, to work specifically with Lucifer. I found a crossroads that felt like definitely a crossroads Lucifer would like. It was one of those deep within the woods on a unbeaten path with craggly old decaying trees and pine needles on the ground. Wonderfully evocative. It was the kind that you stepped there and you went, ooh, this is the one. The ritual which was undertaken is simply to write down an incantation on a card. I can drop that into the chat as well, but it is Lucifer unanimi catunief inoni, and then we reverse those words as one would when making a sigil. So essentially you have a block of text and then that text is reversed. That card was dropped and left there for 3 nights. On the successive 3 nights after nightfall, you go to that location on each night and simply wait for the devil to arrive, which is terrifying, deeply, deeply terrifying. But I went and did this for 3 separate nights, and on the 3rd night, felt this deeply intuitive presence of something else, just something hair raising, the kind of thing that makes your hair on your back of your neck stand up. And I explicitly said that I would be interested in making a deal with the devil where if the devil were to allow me to make X amount of income for the X number of years within my field, then I would tell people about Lucifer. I would make a space for Lucifer on my altar. And at the end of those 5 years, I would write a book, which would kind of detail my process. 2 days later, I received a crazy out of the blue email from a casting group with Netflix. They wanted to offer me a position doing both entertainment and something psychic, which was two key proponents of what I wanted, for the exact amount of money which I wanted, which was wild. However, I was not nearly specific enough because while I said I wanted to do something within psychic entertainment, they were asking me to appear on their entertainment show as a psychic, but it was a show which was entirely, completely at odds with my interests and what I wanted for myself. It was not something that I actively wanted to undertake. So it, for a moment, was that element again of the trickster.
Yep.
So you get what you want, but not really in the way you want it. So my advice, of course, is upon completing this 3-night ritual, be very specific and know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the thing you did not account for may actually come up in the conversation.
Absolutely.
So despite declining this offer, and knowing that there were still more offers in the pipeline, according to my grand bargain, a few days later, I was talking with you, Isabel, and I don't even remember how it came up because we don't really talk about the fact that Lucifer was part of my esoteric practice. But you had the idea for this lecture, and here I am upholding my end of the bargain about talking about Lucifer. So that is my most direct experience with this Lucifer figure. So in short, if you're going to engage in creating a deal with a trickster entity, be sure that you follow the rules, certainly, which are writing out the card, leaving it 3 days, coming up with something the devil will actually want. Again, most likely it is very often going to be sharing your encounter or talking about what the devil did for you. Sometimes some other practitioners who I work with will leave offerings of alcohol or, again, tobacco. These things are all very amenable as well. And just being very clear in intentions. And then following through with your end of the deal.
That's the important part, yes. Being specific. I have many stories like that with the devil, and I may have it may have been when I was 16 that I may have unconsciously just set that deal with the devil that I didn't know about. And that's why the devil came to me and said, you should talk to Dan about doing a lecture.
Very possible.
I love it. Any other final things for Praxis before we stop recording and go to the Q&A?
Sure. The final thing that I would point to is purely archetypal work. If the idea of doing magic scares or is a little concerning, the archetypal work of the devil is simply one that requires radical self-honesty. So really looking inside oneself. The journaling is very useful here. And looking at the habits one cultivates, saying certain places, is it okay for me to loosen up? Is it okay for me to engage in things which are purely about my enjoyment or my lived experience? Because sometimes the answer to that question may be yes. And then also understanding the real benefit of chaos. And I think that's one of the things that these trickster entities, devil archetype figures, have to offer us, even more than deals in the scary woods, is you really can't advance. You really can't go places or do things without exposing yourself to some level of chaos. And in a society where we're very much oriented around the long-term commodity of self, saying, well, if I don't take this job doing this thing I don't like, will I have benefits in 10 years and a pension program that may or may not exist by the time I retire? There isn't, or I would love to go and travel abroad, but oh, I don't know if now's the right time. These big decisions in life, the ones people find most valuable, the ones people routinely write about. Gail Sheehy writes in her book Passages about people being terrified of buying homes or having children or getting married, and it's never the right time. It's never the right time for those big decisions. That seems to be the underarching theme, because we're exposing ourselves to some element of chaos. But those things can often be deeply, deeply rewarding, and things we wouldn't want to miss. So I think that's one of the most important lessons that the devil figure has for us, is with this radical self honesty, this authenticity, there's also an exposure to chaos, and as such, then there's a level of ownership that comes with it. And those are things we can bear in mind.
Absolutely. And I think for the getting comfortable with our inner demons of there are all these different voices, all these different back and forths, and deciding on, I like the word passages, thresholds of deciding on, do I invite the chaos in? Or sometimes chaos takes us by surprise. Right now, what's happening?
Yes.
With jobs, with health, with all different things, and seeing what is this, whether it may be a conscious or subconscious pact that comes with, wait, this is a new opportunity. This is a new kind of level, some new uncharted territory, that there maybe is some kind of treasure, some kind of herbal magic that I can find, some kind of new wisdom, new spells, new awareness that I can bring into myself in this way. And I think the tools that you brought up, very important. Journaling for sure, putting things out on paper. I look at that as a form of exorcism.
Yes.
Right? In a way of, wait, these demons are no longer inside, but they can be spoken out. And sometimes there's multiple, most of the time.
Yeah, it's no coincidence that according to texts, not even biblical ones, but texts about demonology, the most important thing about mastering a demon and turning it out is naming it.
Yes.
That to me feels so analogous to the work I do in journaling, because I feel like as soon as I can name the anxiety that's pinning me to the wall, all of a sudden it's far, far, far less powerful.
Absolutely. It's the, as soon as it's witnessed, as soon as it's named, it's like, oh, okay, you see me now. Well, thank you, Dan, for the history, the praxis, how we've kind of, as humanity on the West anyway, has co-created this devilish figure. And I hope that watching live or watching the replay, that you may have a different view of the devil and demons and how they're present in our lives today.
For sure.
I'm going to stop recording for now, and thank you all for joining on the replay.